This is Future Tech, where each week we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of where tech is headed in 2023 and beyond. News outlets are beginning to push back against Elon Musk's antics at Twitter. Blake Montgomery, deputy editor at Gizmodo, joins us now. And Blake, NPR, we learned this week, is pulling back from Twitter over how Elon is deciding to label some of these news organizations. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, so NPR is saying that Elon Musk questioned its editorial independence, and NPR is an editorially independent news organization, unlike other media outlets that were labeled state-affiliated media on Twitter. That label implies that there is some sort of government control and affiliation between NPR and the US government, which there isn't. NPR gets about 2% of its funding, according to the news organization, from the federal government, which is along the same lines as things like the Washington Post and the New York Times, places that we think of as much more editorially independent, or at least Elon Musk does.
So Elon Musk was, receiving a lot of pushback from the state-owned or state-affiliated label on some of those news organizations. And so he did kind of walk back. He was like, okay. And then he changed it to, I believe it was government funded?
Yeah, there was government funded, and then there was a promise to call it publicly funded. And NPR is publicly funded.
Sure.
They solicit donations from people like you and me, but we don't get to say NPR should cover this story and not this story.
Right.
So public funding still can have editorial independence, unlike other places that are labeled state affiliated, like Russia Today, a lot of Chinese news outlets, which do have heavy government influence on their day-to-day editorial operations. And we see that bear out.
So what's interesting is the BBC was also recently relabeled by Twitter, right? At first they went with the state-affiliated label, and now it's more of a government-funded type label. So the BBC, they're not saying, hey, we're gonna get off Twitter. They actually were like, Elon,
do you want to talk to us?
Yeah.
The other night, Elon Musk sat down with a BBC reporter in this sort of surprise interview. He gave a pretty wide-ranging interview. He said he was sleeping on the couch at Twitter. He made a joke that his dog Floki is the CEO of Twitter. He admitted again that labeling NPR the state-affiliated media was a mistake and kind of walked that back. He said he only bought Twitter because a judge made him. He signed a legal agreement to do that, so a judge making him is having to follow the law, and that's he's clearly trying to, put some distance between the more unsavory elements of what has happened and say well, I had to do it. Well, you signed an agreement.
Exactly, but it seems like he's just all buying Twitter just to already have an established platform to make it X or whatever he wants his all-in-one platform to be.
So he's changed the name from Twitter on its legal filings from Twitter to X. There have been reports that he started a generative AI project within the company. He's trying to integrate a lot of different things that he's been thinking about into what one could call a super app, a la WeChat in China, an app that you use to do a whole range of functions and is wildly profitable, becomes basically infrastructure.
What is interesting though is, after this whole BBC and NPR thing, the labels being switched on them on the app, when you look at Twitter's, guidelines from before Elon Musk, or even recently before this whole change, they were both listed as examples of news outlets that were editorial independent.
It's further evidence that Elon doesn't really understand how Twitter works, despite being its owner. And I would say Twitter needs NPR more so than NPR needs Twitter. Twitter is this thing that a lot of journalists use and inspires news and makes news. There's a lot of newsworthy statements happening on Twitter, but as for traffic, as for people clicking on your articles, an NPR reporter was tweeting that NPR's traffic is only comprised 2% of views from Twitter. So losing that is not so. You put your emphasis on another platform, you can remake that pretty easily.
And NPR has how many different Twitter handles?
Yeah, so the company said that it had 52 accounts. The main NPR account has nearly 9 million followers. It's clearly a big draw of users to Twitter. So it's a big boon for Twitter, for NPR to be there, and it's a big loss for them to leave.
Yeah, well, we'll continue to follow this. We don't need Twitter. We'll still be on it though, probably. But for more information on this story and all things Twitter, all things Elon Musk, visit gizmodo.com.